A typical morning in the downtown core. The sun, just cresting over the skyscrapers, cast long shadows across the bustling streets below. The cacophony of car horns, a distant ambulance siren, and the murmur of countless conversations filled the air. People were beginning their day, rushing to work, grabbing coffee, or walking their dogs. The neighborhood throbbed with life, a vibrant and energetic pulse. Amidst this hurried current, Jamal West moved with a calm deliberation, a stark contrast to the frenetic pace around him. Jamal, in his early 30s, was impeccably dressed in a sharply tailored suit. His polished leather shoes clicked rhythmically against the pavement as he walked. A warm smile played on his lips as he adjusted the cuff of his crisp white shirt. His presence commanded attention, not through any overt effort, but through a quiet confidence that radiated from him. He was the kind of man who drew eyes without trying. He had just finished breakfast at a small, familiar diner, a regular haunt when his schedule allowed. The staff knew his name and always ensured his usual order, scrambled eggs, turkey bacon, and a fruit plate, was prepared with care. As he approached his sleek, black sedan parked on the street, Jamal felt his phone vibrate in his pocket. He pulled it out to see a text from his mother, a reminder about their dinner plans that evening. He smiled, typing a quick reply to let her know he hadn't forgotten and was looking forward to it. Family meant everything to him. Just as he was about to unlock his car, Jamal noticed two police officers approaching him. Their gaze was fixed on him, their expressions unreadable. Jamal didn't recognize them, but that wasn't surprising. New officers rotated through the neighborhood frequently. What was unusual, however, was the intensity in their stare. Jamal had grown up with an understanding of how to conduct himself with police officers, especially as a black man. His father had instilled in him from a young age the importance of remaining calm, respectful, and never giving them reason to escalate a situation. Those lessons were deeply ingrained in his mind. "Excuse me, sir," one of the officers called out as they drew closer. Jamal stopped and turned, phone still in hand. "Yes, officer," Jamal replied, his voice even and polite. He saw the name on the officer's badge, Riley. The other officer, Jenkins, stood slightly behind, his hand resting near his holster. "Let me see your identification," Riley demanded, his tone sharp, almost an order. No greeting, no explanation for their approach. Jamal had been through situations like this before, but something about this encounter felt different. There was a palpable tension in the air that triggered his instincts. "May I ask why?" Jamal responded, maintaining his composure. He didn't want to escalate the situation, but he also knew his rights. He hadn't done anything wrong and saw no reason for them to demand his identification. Riley's eyes narrowed, a smirk playing on his lips. "Just show us your ID, sir. It's a simple request." Jamal held the officer's gaze for a moment, then slowly reached into his jacket pocket. "All right," he said, retrieving his wallet. "But I still want to know why I'm being asked for my ID." As he produced his driver's license, he noticed Jenkins shift slightly, as if preparing for something. Jamal's senses heightened, but he remained calm. Riley took the ID and examined it, his expression unchanged. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" Riley asked, his voice laced with accusation. Jamal's eyebrows furrowed in confusion. "I'm just running my car," he replied honestly. "Is there a problem, officer?" Riley ignored the question. "Where did you come from?" "I had breakfast at the diner down the street," Jamal replied. "As I said, is there a problem, officer?" Riley's eyes flicked up to meet Jamal's, and a flash of something, perhaps annoyance, crossed his face before he handed back the ID. "We received a report of suspicious activity in this area," he said, the smirk returning. "You matched the description of someone we're looking for." Jamal's stomach clenched. He knew where this was going. It was a familiar narrative. A black man in a nice neighborhood, dressed well, must be up to something shady. He'd heard this countless times, but that didn't make dealing with it any easier. "Understand," Jamal said cautiously. "I'm sure this is a misunderstanding. I'm just here to get my car and go to work." Riley didn't seem to hear him. Instead, he stepped closer, his posture more aggressive. "What do you do for a living?" "I'm a lawyer," Jamal answered, keeping his voice steady. "I have a meeting in an hour, so unless there's something else, I'd like to be on my way. That seemed to take Riley aback. His smirk faltered, but only for a second. A lawyer, huh? Don't say anything. Jenkins, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke up. You're not hiding anything, are you? Anything illegal in your car? Jamal felt the tension rising. He knew situations like these could quickly turn ugly. He had to remain calm, to de-escalate. There's nothing illegal in my car, officer. You're welcome to check, but I'd appreciate it if you wouldn't waste my time. I'm just trying to get to work. Riley's eyes hardened. You don't get to decide how we do our job. Get out of the car. Jamal hesitated. He knew he hadn't done anything wrong, but the situation was rapidly becoming dangerous. He had a decision to make. Comply and hope it didn't escalate further, or stand his ground and risk things turning worse. His father's voice echoed in his mind, urging him to remain calm, to be wise. All right, Jamal said slowly, raising his hands slightly to show he wasn't a threat. I'll step back. He stepped away from the car, and as he did, Riley moved closer, his hand now on the car door handle. Jamal's heart pounded, but he maintained a composed expression. He couldn't let them see any fear. Without warning, Riley grabbed Jamal's arm and twisted it behind his back. The suddenness of the move threw Jamal off balance, and he groaned in pain. Before he could react, Jenkins also lunged, pushing him to the ground. Hey, what are you doing? Jamal protested, trying to keep his voice calm, but the pain in his shoulder made it difficult. He wasn't resisting, but the officers were treating him as if he were. You're under arrest for resisting arrest, Riley said coldly as he snapped handcuffs around Jamal's wrists. Jamal's mind raced. Resisting arrest? He hadn't resisted anything. He'd done everything they'd asked, tried to reason with them, tried to stay calm, but it didn't matter. They had made up their minds the moment they'd seen him. By now, the commotion had attracted the attention of those around them. An elderly woman, Agnes Carter, who lived in the apartment building across the street, watched in horror from her balcony. She knew Jamal. She'd seen him in the neighborhood many times and knew he was in trouble. What are you doing to him? She called out, her voice trembling with indignation. He hasn't done anything wrong. A young couple walking their dog also stopped to watch. The man pulled out his phone and began filming. This is messed up, he whispered to his girlfriend. They're arresting him for no reason. Jamal saw the phone recording, and for a moment, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe the footage would help him later. Maybe it would show people the truth of what had happened. But for now, he was helpless as the officers pulled Jamal to his feet. He tried to remain calm, to focus. He knew he had to be careful about what he said next. Anything could be used against him. As they led him toward the police car, the crowd began to grow. More people stopped to watch, to record, to shout their protests at the officers. This isn't right, a man yelled from across the street. He didn't do anything, but Riley and Jenkins ignored them. Their faces were cold and resolute. They shoved Jamal into the back of the police car and slammed the door shut. Before they drove away, Jamal turned his head toward the crowd, looking out the window. He could see the worry, the anger, the bewilderment on their faces. He took a deep breath, knowing he had to say something, even if it was just a few words. This isn't over, he said loudly, his voice echoing through the thin glass. This isn't over. Those words hung in the air as the car sped away, leaving the stunned crowd behind. Inside the car, Jamal's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts about what would happen next, about how he would fight this, about how he would ensure justice was served. The police station was a stark contrast to the bustling streets outside. Cold, gray walls, harsh fluorescent lighting, and the constant hum of activity created an oppressive atmosphere. Officers moved swiftly through the hallways, some whispering conversations, others focused intently on their tasks. The station was busy, yet there was an underlying tension in the air, the kind that made people speak in hushed tones and glance over their shoulders. Jamal West was led into the police station, his hands still cuffed behind his back. Officer Riley and Officer Jenkins accompanied him, their expressions unreadable. As they passed through the booking area, a few officers looked up, their eyes narrowing as they took in Jamal's appearance. He was clearly not the usual type of suspect they brought in. A WL, dressed black man, his calm demeanor seemed out of place here. Over here, Riley barked, leading Jamal to a desk where a weary-looking officer sat behind a computer. The officer glanced up, then back down at his screen, paying little attention to Jamal's presence. "Name?" the officer asked, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Jamal West." Riley answered before Jamal could speak. The officer typed the name into the system, his eyes scanning the screen. He frowned slightly, but said nothing, instead gesturing for Riley to take Jamal to the fingerprinting station. "Let's get this over with," Riley muttered, shoving Jamal forward. Jamal didn't resist. He knew better than to give them any reason to make things worse. As they took his fingerprints, he remained silent, his mind reeling. He couldn't believe this was happening. He hadn't done anything wrong, yet he was being treated like a criminal. But he knew he had to stay calm, to think clearly. This wasn't the first time he'd faced a situation like this, and it very well might not be the last. After fingerprinting, Riley and Jenkins led Jamal to a small holding cell in the back of the station. The cell was cramped, with a narrow bench along one wall and a metal toilet in the corner. The air was thick with the smell of disinfectant and something else, a sour, unpleasant odor. They removed his handcuffs and shoved him inside. "Make yourself comfortable," Jenkins sneered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You might be here a while." Jamal sat down on the bench, taking a deep breath. He didn't respond to the taunt. It served no purpose. He knew they were trying to provoke him, try and get a reaction, but he wouldn't give them that. As Riley and Jenkins left, they exchanged a look, a silent understanding passing between them. They had done their job, bagged another troublemaker, and now they could move on to other things. But something about this arrest, a certain nod from Riley, bothered him. He couldn't quite place it, but Jamal's demeanor, the calmness, the confidence, it didn't fit the profile of the people they usually arrested. "He thinks he's a lawyer, huh?" Jenkins scoffed as they returned to the reception desk. "Probably just another thug in a nice suit." "Yeah," Riley muttered, though his mind was elsewhere. He wasn't so sure anymore. There was something off about Jamal, but he couldn't put his finger on it. He shook his head, trying to dismiss the thought. It didn't matter. They had the warrant, and they followed procedure. That was all that mattered. But as they reached the reception desk, a young officer who had been silently observing the scene stepped forward. His name was Officer Stevens, and he had only been with the department for a few months. He was eager to prove himself, to show he could handle the job, but he was also sharper than most people gave him credit for. "Hey, Riley," Stevens called, his voice low. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" Riley glanced at him, frowning. "What is it?" Stevens hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. "That guy you just brought in, Jamal West, I think I know who he is." Riley's face tightened. "What are you talking about?" Stevens leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I saw him in an article a few weeks ago. He's not just a lawyer. He's a civil rights lawyer, a pretty prominent one at that. He's been involved in some big cases, high-profile ones." Riley's eyes widened, but he quickly masked his surprise. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely," Stevens replied. "I didn't recognize him at first, but when I heard the name, it clicked. You should be careful with this guy. If he's who I think he is, this could blow up in our faces." Riley didn't respond immediately. He felt a knot of unease in his stomach, but he pushed it down. This couldn't be right. They had arrested him fairly. There was no way he was that important. But the doubt had been planted, clinging to him. "I'll handle it," Riley said curtly, dismissing Stevens with a wave of his hand. But as he turned away, he couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that had settled in his chest. Stevens watched Riley go, then pulled out his phone. He quickly scrolled through his contacts, finding the number he needed. Taking a deep breath, he prayed he was making the right decision. The phone rang twice before a gruff voice answered. "Hello, this is Captain. It's Stevens," he said, keeping his voice low. "We have a situation here I think you need to know about." Meanwhile, back in the holding cell, Jamal sat in silence, his thoughts focused. He knew this wasn't just about him, but about something bigger. He had been targeted, he was sure of it, but he didn't know why. As he waited, he maintained his composure, refusing to let fear consume him. He'd been through worse, and he knew he would get through this. An hour passed, and nothing happened. The cell door opened, and a woman entered. She was in her early 30s, with sharp eyes and an air of authority that commanded attention. Her name was Lieutenant Kate Thompson, and she had only been with the department for a few weeks, transferred from another precinct. She was still getting to know the team, but she had made it clear that she wasn't someone to be underestimated. Thompson's eyes scanned the room, taking in the officers at work. She saw Riley and Jenkins at the reception desk, whispering to each other. Something about their demeanor caught her attention. She had learned to trust her instincts, and right now, they were telling her that something wasn't right. "Riley Jenkins," she called out, walking toward them. "What's going on here?" Riley looked up, surprised to see her. "Not much, ma'am. Just another day at the office." Thompson's eyes narrowed. "Really? Because I hear you brought someone earlier today, a man named Jamal West." Riley stiffened, but he quickly regained his composure. "Yes, ma'am, we did." "And the charges?" she asked, her voice remaining calm but probing. "Resisting arrest," Riley replied, his voice even. "We had reason to believe he was involved in suspicious activity when we questioned him, and he refused to cooperate." Thompson raised an eyebrow. "He did he?" Riley nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Thompson didn't respond immediately. Instead, she studied Riley's face, looking for any sign that he was lying. She'd dealt with officers like him before, men who thought they could bend the rules as long as it suited them. But she was different. She'd risen through the ranks by doing things by the book, and she expected her team to do the same. "Take me to him," she said finally, her voice leaving no room for argument. Riley hesitated for the smallest fraction of a second before saying, "Yes, ma'am. This way." As they walked toward the holding cells, Thompson couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than Riley was letting on. When they reached Jamal's cell, she stopped, her gaze locking onto the man inside. He was sitting on the bench, his hands resting on his lap, relaxed despite the circumstances. There was something about him, something that made her pause. "This is him?" she asked, turning to Riley. "Yes, ma'am," Riley confirmed. "Like I said, he resisted arrest, so we had no choice but to take him in." Thompson didn't respond immediately. Instead, she opened the cell door and stepped inside. Jamal looked up, meeting her gaze with calm, steady eyes. He didn't look scared, but he didn't look defiant either. He was simply composed. "Hello, Mr. West," Thompson said, her voice measured. "I'm Lieutenant Kate Thompson, and I'm here to ask you a few questions." "Certainly, Lieutenant," Jamal replied politely. "I'd be happy to. Please cooperate." Thompson nodded, appreciating Jamal's calm demeanor. "I'm told you resisted arrest, leading to your apprehension. I want to hear your account." Jamal maintained his steady gaze. "Lieutenant, I did nothing of the sort. I followed all instructions given by Officers Riley and Jenkins. I was walking to my car when they stopped me. I asked them why I was being detained, and that simple question seemed to escalate the situation. Before I knew it, I was handcuffed and charged with resisting arrest, despite my compliance with their orders." Thompson listened intently, her eyes narrowing as she processed Jamal's words. There was something in his tone, calm and measured, yet with an underlying firmness that suggested he wasn't just another man trying to wriggle out of trouble. She turned to Riley, who stood a few feet away, his expression impassive. "Is that right, Riley?" Thompson asked, her voice sharp. "Did Mr. West follow your instructions?" Riley shifted uncomfortably. "Well, ma'am, he questioned us and things got tense. We had reason to believe he might be concealing something." Thompson's gaze hardened. "And what exactly was that reason?" Riley hesitated, unable to provide a convincing answer. "It was just a feeling, ma'am. A gut feeling." "A feeling?" Thompson repeated, her voice laced with disbelief. "That's the basis for your arrest?" Riley started to respond, but he was interrupted by the jail cell door opening. Everyone turned as Officer Stevens entered, looking slightly breathless. He paused upon seeing the group in the cell block, realizing he'd stumbled into a tense situation. "Lieutenant, I need to speak with you," Stevens said quickly, glancing between Jamal and Riley. Thompson gave Riley one last sharp look before stepping out of the cell block and closing the door behind her. "What is it, Stevens?" Thompson asked, her voice clearly trying to keep the conversation private. "Ma'am, I've done some digging. Jamal West isn't just your average lawyer. He's a prominent civil rights attorney. He's been involved in some major cases, the kind that make headlines. If word gets out that we arrested him without cause, it'll be a disaster." Thompson felt her stomach drop. She suspected there was more to this, but hearing the full extent of Jamal's influence made the situation even more serious. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely," Stevens replied, holding out his phone, with a website open displaying Jamal's profile. "This is him. If we don't handle this carefully, we'll be facing more than an internal affairs investigation." Thompson quickly scanned the page, her eyes widening as she read about Jamal's background. He wasn't just a lawyer, but a powerful figure in the legal community who had sued police departments, corporations, and government agencies. He was the kind of person who could turn this entire precinct upside down if they weren't careful. She turned to look at Riley, who was still standing near the cell block with Jenkins, both looking increasingly anxious. Thompson knew she had to act fast. The situation was deteriorating, and she couldn't let it get any worse. "Riley, Jenkins," Thompson called out, approaching them with urgency. "We need to talk now." The two officers exchanged a look before following Thompson out of the detention area. Once they were in a more private part of the precinct, Thompson turned to them, her face grim. "Do you know who you just arrested?" she demanded, keeping her voice low but intense. "Jamal West isn't just some random man on the street. He's a renowned civil rights attorney known for taking on cases of police misconduct. If he decides to sue us, we're all in serious trouble." Riley's face paled, his bravado waning. "Ma'am, he didn't mention being a lawyer." "That doesn't matter," Thompson snapped. "You should have done your due diligence before arresting him. Now we need to figure out how to handle this, and fast." As she spoke, the sounds of a large gathering outside the precinct began to seep in. Thompson looked up, her heart sinking as she realized what was happening. The crowd outside was growing larger, and they were getting louder. She could hear the unmistakable chants of protesters demanding justice and Jamal's release. "Great," Thompson muttered. "Just what we needed." Stevens, who had been standing nearby, stepped forward. "Lieutenant, the community is outraged. We have activists, local leaders, and even some media started to show up. If we don't do something soon, this could turn into a full-blown crisis." Thompson knew he was right. She had witnessed situations like this before, minor incidents escalating into something much larger because they weren't handled properly. But this was different. This wasn't just about de-escalating a tense situation. It was about protecting. Captain Thompson, decisive, stated, "Riley, Jenkins, I want a full report on the arrest, detailing every step. I don't care about the time. Get it to me. Stevens, I need you to help me figure out the best way to handle the press. We need to control the narrative before things get out of hand." The officers dispersed to carry out their orders. Captain Thompson felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. Only weeks into her posting at the precinct, and she was already facing a potential disaster. But she wouldn't let this ruin her career or the reputation of the police department. Inside the jail cell, Jamal sat still, his mind racing as he listened to the growing commotion outside. He heard the crowd swelling, their voices echoing throughout the precinct. He knew his family would be there, along with the community leaders and activists who always supported him. They wouldn't let this stand. A spark of hope flickered within him, but he knew he couldn't relax yet. The police were still in control, and they were adept at manipulating situations to their advantage. He had witnessed it firsthand, and he wouldn't underestimate them. Outside the police station, the tension was escalating. The crowd had grown to over 100 people, carrying signs and banners demanding justice for Jamal. Reporters had arrived, cameras focused on the scene, capturing every moment. The police station was becoming a focal point, a symbol of the growing unrest within the community. Captain Thompson watched from the window, her jaw clenched in frustration. She knew she had to do something, but she was walking a tightrope. One wrong move, and everything could explode. But if she did nothing, the situation would escalate uncontrollably on its own. She turned to Stevens, who stood beside her, his face equally worried. "We have to release him," she said, her voice hoarse. "It's the only way to de-escalate the situation." Stevens nodded in agreement. "But how do we explain it to the media?" They won't accept us just releasing him without an explanation. Thompson thought for a moment before responding. We say it was a misunderstanding. Say that after reviewing the evidence, we determined there was no basis for the arrest and decided to release him. We'll emphasize that we take these matters very seriously and we're committed to justice and fairness. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was the best they had. Hopefully, it would be enough to appease the crowd and prevent the situation from escalating further. Thompson knew it wouldn't be easy, but she had no other choice. She had to think about the bigger picture. The police department, her career, and the potential repercussions if they didn't handle this properly. Thompson left the window and returned to the detention area. She was determined to resolve this before things got any worse. Passing through the precinct, she saw Riley and Jenkins furiously typing up their reports. She paused for a moment, her gaze hardening. When this is over, we're going to have a long talk about where things went wrong. And believe me, it won't be pleasant. Riley swallowed hard, nodding silently. He knew he was in deep trouble, but right now there was nothing he could do but hope Thompson could salvage the mess they had created. When Thompson reached Jamal's cell, she unlocked it herself, entering with a calm demeanor. Mr. West, I've reviewed the situation, and it's clear there was a misunderstanding. You're free to go. Jamal rose slowly, his expression wary. A misunderstanding, Captain? Is that what we're calling it? Thompson looked directly into his eyes, not flinching. Yes. I sincerely apologize for what happened today. It shouldn't have gone this far. Jamal studied her for a moment, his sharp eyes searching for any sign of deception. Finally, he nodded. I appreciate your apology, Captain, but you should know this isn't over. Thompson didn't doubt that. She knew Jamal West wasn't the type to let this go. But for now, her priority was getting him out of the precinct safely and calming the situation outside. She escorted Jamal out of the detention area, passing tense officers who avoided his gaze. Reaching the front door, Thompson paused, taking a deep breath. I'll do everything I can to make amends, she said softly. Jamal nodded, but didn't reply. He stepped outside, the crowd erupting in cheers at the sight of him. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, but Jamal ignored them, calmly walking towards his waiting family and friends. As he embraced his loved ones, Thompson watched from the doorway, her expression unreadable. She knew this was only the beginning. Jamal West wouldn't let this go, and the repercussions of today's events would linger long after. But for now, the immediate crisis was resolved. The crowd was dispersing, the reporters were packing up, and the tension that had gripped the police station was beginning to ease. Thompson knew she still had a long road ahead to repair the damage that had been done, but she was determined to face it head-on. As Jamal walked away from the precinct, he knew this was just the beginning of a new battle. He had been wronged, but he also knew how to turn that wrong into something stronger. The truth would be revealed, and when it was, the police department and the town would never be the same. The tension within the police precinct remained palpable even after Jamal West had walked out the front door. Captain Kate Thompson couldn't shake the feeling that the situation was far from over. Sitting in her office, reviewing the preliminary reports from officers Riley and Jenkins, her thoughts kept returning to the man they had arrested. There was something about Jamal's handling of the situation, calm, composed, almost expectant, that haunted her. She had a gut feeling that there was more to this story than met the eye. Thompson wasn't one to ignore her instincts. If she'd learned anything in her years on the police force, it was to trust her gut, especially when things didn't quite add up. Outside her office, the precinct still buzzed with a somber energy following a major incident. Officers moved about, avoiding each other's eyes, aware that they were still walking a tightrope. The crowd that had gathered outside earlier had largely dispersed, but the damage had been done. Everyone knew this wasn't something that would easily go away. Thompson leaned back in her chair, staring up at the ceiling. The silence in her office was a stark contrast to the turmoil in her mind. She knew she needed to dig deeper to understand who Jamal West really was and why his arrest had caused such a chain reaction. She couldn't let this remain unanswered, both for her own sake and for the reputation of the police department. She reached for her computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she searched for more information about Jamal. The results were startling. Articles, news clips, and interviews painted a picture of a man who was far more than just a lawyer. Jamal West was a formidable force, a civil rights attorney who had battled some of the most powerful entities in the country, winning cases that made headlines and changed the lives of countless individuals. Thompson scrolled through the information, her eyes narrowing as she read about Jamal's most recent case, a massive lawsuit against a police department in another city. The lawsuit had exposed widespread corruption, leading to the dismissal of numerous officers and others facing criminal charges. It was a resounding victory for Jamal and his team, but it also put him in the crosshairs of law enforcement agencies across the country. As she dug deeper, Thompson stumbled upon a detail that sent a chill down her spine. Jamal West was involved in a federal investigation into systemic racism in law enforcement. The investigation had resulted in federal oversight of several police departments, and rumors circulated that many others were under scrutiny. Thompson's heart pounded as she realized the implications. She quickly called a contact at the FBI, someone she knew she could trust to receive information without revealing her sources. The conversation was brief, but when she hung up, Thompson's suspicions were confirmed. Jamal West was working undercover, gathering evidence for a federal lawsuit that had the potential to bring down several high-ranking officials within the local law enforcement community, including her own police department. Thompson leaned back in her chair, her mind reeling. This was bigger than she had imagined. Jamal wasn't just in the wrong place at the wrong time. He'd been targeted, and the officers who arrested him had unwittingly walked right into a trap. If this came out, it would be a scandal of epic proportions. She knew she had to confront Riley and Jenkins, but first, she needed more information. She spent the next hour piecing together everything she could about Jamal's work, his connections, and the ongoing federal investigation. The more she investigated, the more certain she became that the situation was far more dangerous than anyone realized. Finally, Thompson stood up, taking a deep breath. She was about to walk into a storm, but she had no other choice. She couldn't let her police department crumble because of someone else's mistake. As she headed to the officer's work area, she braced herself for the confrontation ahead. When she arrived at Riley and Jenkins' desks, they were poring over their reports. They looked up as she approached, sensing the tension in her posture. Officer Riley saluted her, his voice cautious. "Captain, is there something we can help you with?" Thompson folded her arms, staring at them with a sharp gaze. "We need to talk right now." The two officers exchanged a look before nodding. They followed her to an empty conference room, where Thompson closed the door behind her. The room was simple, just a long table and a few chairs. It was the kind of room where difficult conversations took place, and both officers knew this wouldn't be a pleasant one. "Captain, what's going on?" Jenkins asked, trying to sound calm, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Thompson wasted no time. "I know who Jamal West is." Riley's eyes widened, and Jenkins went stiff. Neither of them spoke, but Thompson could see the flicker of panic in their eyes. They hadn't known who they were dealing with, and now that was coming back to haunt them. "Do you know what kind of trouble you've caused?" Thompson continued, her voice low and dangerous. "Jamal West is a civil rights attorney and a federal agent. He's been working undercover, gathering evidence of police corruption, evidence that could implicate this very police department." Riley's face went white. "We didn't know, Captain. He didn't say anything about working undercover. We thought he was just what?" Thompson snapped. "Just a black man you could bully without consequence?" Jenkins flinched, looking down at his feet. Riley opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. Thompson could see the realization dawning on them, the weight of what they had done pressing down on them. "You've put all of us in danger," Thompson said, her voice carrying the weight not only of the police department, but of the entire city. "If this investigation comes out, we will all fall." Riley finally found his voice. "Captain, we didn't know. We just followed procedure." "Procedure?" Thompson interrupted, her voice rising. "What procedure? You arrested a man without cause. You treated him like a criminal, and now we're in the middle of a federal investigation that could destroy everything we've worked for. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about the entire police department. Jenkins looked like he was about to be sick. "What do we do now, Captain?" Before Thompson could answer, the conference room door burst open and Chief of Police Frank Daniels stormed in, his face red, eyes blazing as he took in the scene before him. "Captain Thompson," he shouted, his voice booming. "What in God's name is going on here?" Thompson stood up straight, meeting the chief's angry gaze. "Chief, we have a serious problem." "I know who Jamal West is," Chief Daniels interrupted, his voice laced with venom. "And I know exactly what kind of mess you've made." "Captain Thompson." Thompson blinked in surprise. "I said, let me explain." Daniels cut her off again. "Do you know what you put this police department through? We have a civil rights attorney working undercover in our city. And she gave him all the evidence he needed to bring us down. This is a disaster, and it's her fault." Captain Thompson's voice was tight. "With all due respect, Chief, it's not solely my fault. Officers Riley and Jenkins made the arrest without justification, and now we all pay the price." Chief Daniels' eyes flickered to Riley and Jenkins, his expression hardening. "We'll deal with them later. Right now, we need to focus on damage control." Thompson nodded, striving to maintain her composure. "I've started looking into this. There's a federal investigation into systemic racism in law enforcement, and it's connected to the recent federal oversight of local police departments. Jamal West was gathering evidence for that investigation, and if we don't handle this carefully, it could destroy us." The anger seemed to drain from Daniel's face, replaced by grim determination. "What's our next step?" Before Thompson could answer, a sharp rap echoed against the conference room door. A young officer poked his head in, his face etched with worry. "Chief, Captain, someone wants to see you. He says it's urgent." Daniels frowned. "Who is it?" The officer swallowed hard. "A federal agent. His name is Williams." A heavy silence descended upon the room, the weight of those words pressing down on them. Thompson exchanged a tense glance with the chief. This was the moment they'd both dreaded. "Let him in," Daniels ordered, his voice firm. The young officer nodded and disappeared down the hallway. A moment later, the door opened again, and Special Agent Mark Williams entered. He was a tall, powerfully built man, his face stern, his presence commanding immediate attention. His dark suit was impeccably tailored, and the badge on his belt gleamed under the fluorescent lights. "Chief Daniels, Captain Thompson, Agent Williams." He greeted them curtly, his eyes sweeping across the room. "We need to talk." Daniels straightened, attempting to regain control of the situation. "Agent Williams, I'm sure we can explain." Williams raised a hand, silencing him. "No explanations, Chief. I know exactly what happened here, and let me be clear, this is a very serious matter." Thompson felt her pulse quicken as she looked at the agent. The gravity in his voice was unmistakable. Whatever was about to happen, it would be significant. "Jamal West is a key figure in a federal investigation," Williams continued, his voice even. "An investigation that's been underway for months. His arrest was a mistake with potentially far-reaching consequences if not handled correctly." Daniels shifted uncomfortably. "We understand that, Agent Williams. We're prepared to cooperate fully." "Good," Williams replied, his tone clipped. "Because right now, your cooperation is the only thing that can prevent this situation from escalating further." Thompson's mind raced as she tried to grasp the full extent of what was unfolding. This wasn't just about Jamal West anymore. It was about the entire police department, the entire city, and if they weren't careful, it could all come crashing down. Williams' gaze hardened as he addressed the room. "You will issue a formal apology on behalf of the police department. Any resistance to these orders will be met swiftly and decisively." Daniel's face flushed with anger, but he nodded stiffly. "Understood." Williams turned to Thompson, his expression unreadable. "Captain, I expect you to oversee this personally. Ensure there are no further incidents." Thompson nodded, her mouth dry. "I will." With that, Williams nodded curtly and turned to leave, but before exiting the room, he paused, glancing over his shoulder. "One more thing," he said, his voice dropping, growing more dangerous. "Consider this my warning. The federal government is watching closely. Any further misconduct within this police department will not be tolerated. As the door clicked shut behind him, a stunned silence filled the room. Thompson felt the weight of responsibility settle heavily upon her, suffocating her with its intensity. She knew the road ahead would be arduous, but she also knew she had no choice but to navigate it. The atmosphere at the police station was thick with tension as the day wore on. The morning's events had set off a chain reaction no one could have foreseen, and now everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. News of Jamal West's wrongful arrest had spread like wildfire, sparking outrage not only within the community, but across the city. Protests erupted outside the station, with activists, community leaders, and citizens voicing their concerns and demanding justice. Inside, Chief Frank Daniels was trying to salvage what was left of his reputation. He knew the police department was on the brink of a public relations disaster, and the only way to prevent it from escalating out of control was to issue a public apology. But he also knew that a simple apology might not be enough to quell the anger that had been simmering for years. In his office, Chief Daniels sat at his desk, staring at his phone. His hand trembled slightly as he lifted the receiver, dialing the number of the public relations team. He needed to prepare a statement, something that would show the community that the police department was taking this matter seriously. But deep down, he knew that no amount of carefully crafted words could erase the damage that had been done. When the public relations team answered, Daniels spoke in a calm, steady voice. "I need you to draft a public apology. We'll address the media outside the station this afternoon." "Understood, Chief. We'll get right on it," the voice on the other end replied. Daniels hung up and leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his graying hair. He felt the weight of his decisions pressing down on him, the consequences of years of turning a blind eye as officers like Riley and Jenkins overstepped their boundaries. He'd always told himself it was just part of the job, that sometimes you had to compromise to keep the peace, but now those compromises were coming back to haunt him. A knock on the door broke Daniels from his thoughts. Captain Kate Thompson stood in the doorway, her face strained but resolute. She said, "Chief, Jamal West is waiting outside with the crowd." Daniels nodded, pushing himself to his feet. "All right, I'll go out there and issue the apology." Thompson hesitated, then stepped closer. "Chief, I need to tell you something before you go out." Daniels raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" Thompson took a deep breath. "I've uncovered evidence of systemic corruption within the police department. Bribery, cover-ups, racism. This goes far beyond Riley and Jenkins. It's been going on for years, and it's been covered up." Daniels felt a chill run down his spine. "Are you sure?" Thompson nodded. "I've started gathering evidence with the help of Jamal and the federal oversight team. We can start cleaning up this mess, but it's going to be a long and difficult process." Daniels sighed, his shoulders slumping under the weight of her words. "Then we do what we have to do. It's time to face the consequences of our actions." Thompson nodded slightly, in agreement. "I'll stand by you out there, Chief. We need to show the community that we're serious about change." Daniels didn't reply, but his eyes said it all. He knew this wasn't just about saving face anymore. It was about survival. If it didn't act now, the entire police department could be dismantled. Together, they walked out of the office and toward the front of the station. As they approached the door, they could hear the crowd outside, the angry voices demanding justice, shouting for accountability. Daniels felt his stomach clench with anxiety, but he kept his expression calm as he pushed open the door and stepped out into the sunlight. The crowd fell silent as they saw him, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward, reporters shouting questions, but Daniels ignored them, focusing on the podium that had been set up for the press conference. He could see Jamal standing amidst the crowd, his expression unreadable, his presence powerful. Daniels cleared his throat and stepped onto the podium, adjusting the microphone gently. He could feel the eyes of the crowd on him, judging him, waiting to see what he would say. "Hello, everyone," he began, his voice even but strained. "I want to start by acknowledging the events that occurred this morning. The arrest of Mr. Jamal West was a mistake that should never have happened. I take full responsibility for what occurred, and I want to offer my sincerest apologies to Mr. West and to the community." The crowd murmured, a mixture of skepticism and anger rippling through the air. Daniels could feel the pressure mounting, the weight of decades of mistrust pressing down on him. We recognize that this incident is part of a larger problem, Daniels continued, his voice somber. A problem that has existed for far too long within our police department. I want to assure you all that we are committed to addressing these issues head-on. Effective immediately, Officers Riley and Jenkins have been suspended pending an internal investigation. We will conduct a thorough review of our operations and procedures, and we will work closely with the federal oversight team to ensure that we are adhering to the highest standards of accountability. The crowd was silent, listening intently, but Daniels could see the doubt in their eyes, the weariness from years of broken promises. I know that words alone are not enough, Daniels said, his voice trembling slightly. We have a lot of work to do to rebuild the trust that has been lost, but I want you to know that we are committed to making the necessary changes. We will work with community leaders, activists, and organizations to create a police department that serves and protects everyone, regardless of race or background. He paused, searching for the right words to end his statement. But before he could continue, Jamal West stepped forward, raising his hand to stop him. Chief Daniels, Jamal said, his voice calm but firm. I appreciate the apology, but this is not just about words. This is about action. Real justice goes beyond a public apology. It demands real change, real accountability, and real commitment. Daniels nodded slowly, stepping back from the microphone. He knew that Jamal was. The apology was just the beginning, and the real work was still ahead. Jamal turned to face the crowd, his presence commanding their full attention. We've heard apologies before, he said, his voice echoing through the crowd, but what we need now is a commitment to real, lasting change. We need to hold those in power accountable for their actions, and we need to work together to build a system that treats everyone with fairness and dignity. The crowd erupted in thunderous applause, cheers of agreement ringing out. Jamal's words resonated within them, soothing the anger and frustration that had built up for so long. This isn't just about what happened to me, Jamal continued, his voice strong and clear. It's about all of us. It's about every single person who has been harmed by a system that was supposed to protect them. It's about making sure that no one else has to go through what I've been through. And it's about ensuring that justice isn't just a word but a reality. The crowd roared its approval, and Jamal paused, letting the energy of the moment wash over him. He saw the hope in their eyes, the longing for something better. It was a powerful feeling, a feeling he knew he couldn't ignore. Change doesn't happen overnight, Jamal said, his tone calmer now. It takes time, it takes effort, and it takes all of us working together. But I believe we can do it. I believe we can build a better future, not just for ourselves, but for generations to come. The applause thundered, and Jamal stepped back from the podium, his message delivered. The crowd's response was overwhelming, a wave of support washing over him, filling him with determination. He knew this was just the beginning of a long and difficult journey, but he was ready. He was ready to lead the fight for justice, to hold those in power accountable, and to ensure that the voices of the marginalized were heard. As Jamal mingled with the crowd, embracing friends and supporters, Lieutenant Thompson watched from the steps of the police station. She felt a mixture of relief and determination. Relief that the immediate crisis had been averted and addressed, and determination to see change implemented. She knew that the police department had a long way to go, but with people like Jamal West leading the way, she believed they could do it. Thompson turned to Chief Daniels, who was still standing by the podium, his face weary but resolute. We have a lot of work to do, she said softly. Daniels nodded, his gaze fixed on the crowd. Yes, but we will get through this. As the crowd began to disperse, Thompson noticed a figure lingering at the edge of the gathering. A tall man, dressed in a dark suit, exuded an aura of quiet authority. He looked at Jamal with sharp, assessing eyes, his expression inscrutable. Curious, Thompson approached the man. Can I help you? She asked. The man turned to face her, his gaze sharp and focused. I'm here to speak with Mr. West, he said, his voice low and calm. I have a message for him. Thompson frowned, studying the man more closely. There was something about him that made her uneasy, something she couldn't quite place. "Who are you?" she asked. The man offered a slight smile, but the warmth didn't reach his eyes. "Just someone with a vested interest in seeing justice served." Before Thompson could respond, the man turned and walked toward Jamal, disappearing into the crowd. She watched him go, a feeling of unease rising within her. Whoever he was, she had a feeling this wasn't the last they'd see of him. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows on the steps of the police station, Thompson knew that the day's events were only the beginning. The fight for justice was far from over, and the road ahead was fraught with uncertainties. But for the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope, a hope that perhaps they could finally begin to make amends. At a small community center, another important meeting was taking place. Jamal sat at a table, surrounded by a diverse group of people: community leaders, activists, legal experts, and concerned citizens. They were hammering out the details of the Community Justice Initiative, debating strategies and priorities. "We need to focus on education," Maria Hernandez, the local school teacher, argued. "If we want lasting change, we have to start with the young people." "I agree, Dr. James Carter, a sociology professor at City University, said, "But we can't ignore the immediate needs of those who are currently suffering under an unjust system. We need a multi-pronged approach." Jamal listened carefully to each perspective, taking notes and asking questions. He was impressed by the passion and expertise in the room. This was exactly what he had hoped for: a collaborative effort harnessing the power of the entire community. As the meeting progressed, they began to formulate concrete plans. They would establish a legal aid clinic to provide free representation to those who couldn't afford it. They would develop a community oversight board to work alongside the police department's internal affairs division. They would create educational programs for schools and community centers, focusing on civil rights, civic engagement, and conflict resolution. By the time the meeting concluded, everyone felt energized and focused. They had a long road ahead, but they had taken the first steps together. Weeks bled into months, and the city began to witness small but significant changes. The police department, under the watchful eye of Lieutenant Thompson and the newly formed oversight board, implemented new training programs focusing on de-escalation techniques and cultural sensitivity. Officers like Stevens, who had shown a genuine desire for improvement, were given opportunities to work directly with community leaders and social workers. Meanwhile, the Community Justice Initiative was up and running. Their legal aid clinic had taken on dozens of cases, providing representation to those who had been wrongfully arrested or abused by police. The educational programs were being piloted in several schools, with plans to expand citywide. But perhaps the most significant change was in the very atmosphere of the city. There was a sense of engagement, of people working together to tackle long-standing issues. Neighborhood watch groups were collaborating with police officers to improve security without resorting to racial profiling. Community forums were being held regularly, creating a platform for open dialogue between citizens and local officials. Of course, not everything was smooth sailing. There were still instances of misconduct, moments of tension, and mistrust. Change was a slow process, and there were those who resisted it at every turn. But the difference now was that there were systems in place to address these issues, to hold people accountable, and to continue pushing forward. 6 months after the incident that ignited it all, Jamal found himself back at the police station. This time, however, he wasn't a suspect or a victim, but a partner. He had been invited to speak at a training session for new recruits, to share his perspective and help shape the next generation of officers. Walking through the halls, Jamal couldn't help but reflect on the monumental changes. The atmosphere in the station was different. There was still the hustle and bustle of activity, but there was also an openness that hadn't been there before. Officers greeted him with respectful nods, some even stopping to shake his hand. Lieutenant Thompson met him at the door of the training room. "Thanks for coming, Mr. West," she said, extending her hand. "I think your perspective will be invaluable to these recruits." Jamal shook her hand, noticing the genuine warmth in her eyes. "I'm happy to be here," he replied. "And please call me Jamal." As they entered the room, Jamal saw rows of young faces looking up at him. Some were curious, others slightly wary. He understood their hesitation. He represented a challenge to the way things had always been done. But he also saw in them the potential for real change. "Good morning," he began, his voice calm and steady. "My name is Jamal West, and I'm here to talk to you about justice. Not just the kind of justice you'll swear to uphold, but the kind of justice that extends far beyond badges and courtrooms. The justice of treating every person you encounter with dignity and respect." As he spoke, sharing his experiences and insights, Jamal could see the recruits listening intently. They asked thoughtful questions, engaged in respectful debate, and seemed genuinely interested in learning how to become better officers. After the training session, as Jamal was packing up his materials, one of the recruits approached him. She was young, barely out of her teens, with a determined look on her face. "Mr. West," she said, her voice slightly hesitant, "I just wanted to thank you for coming today. I joined the force because I wanted to make a difference, to help people, but after everything that happened, I started to wonder if I was making a mistake. Hearing you speak today reminded me why I'm here." Jamal smiled, touched by her sincerity. "What's your name?" he asked. "Sarah," she replied, "Sarah Johnson." "Well, Sarah," Jamal said, "I'm glad you're here. The police department needs people like you, people who want to make a difference, people who are willing to ask questions and learn. Don't lose heart." As Sarah walked away, Jamal felt a surge of hope. He realized that it was people like her who would determine whether the changes they were fighting for would last. That evening, Jamal sat in his office at the Community Justice Initiative, reviewing case files and reports. The work was never-ending, but he found it incredibly fulfilling. Each small victory, each life improved, made the long hours and sleepless nights worthwhile. A knock on the door interrupted his train of thought. He looked up to see Maria Hernandez, the educator who had been instrumental in developing their educational programs. "Jamal," she said, excitement evident in her voice, "I just got out of a meeting with the school board. They approved our curriculum for all the high schools in the district." Jamal stood up, a broad smile spreading across his face. "That's fantastic news, Maria. Your hard work is really paying off." Maria offered a radiant smile, but then her expression turned more serious. "It's been a team effort, Jamal. This wouldn't have happened without you, without what you've been through." Jamal shook his head. "I may have been a catalyst, but this movement is much bigger than me. It's about all of us working together to create the change we want to see." As they discussed the details of the curriculum rollout, Jamal felt a profound sense of satisfaction. This was the picture of real change, not just protests and speeches, but concrete actions that would shape the future of their community. That night, as Jamal finally headed home, he paused for a moment before the office. The streets were quiet, the city settling into its nighttime rhythm. He thought about the monumental changes that had taken place in just 6 months, and how much more work remained to be done. But as he looked up at the twinkling stars in the clear night sky, Jamal felt a sense of peace wash over him. They were on the right track. He knew it wouldn't be easy, and there would be obstacles along the way. But as long as they kept pushing, kept working together, they could build the kind of community everyone dreamed of, a place where justice wasn't just a word, but a lived reality for everyone. With renewed determination, Jamal began walking home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference, and he was ready to face them, one step at a time. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to my channel. I poured a lot of time and effort into creating these moving stories, and your support truly means the world to me. Thank you for being a part of this journey.